Okay, thanks everyone. We might start again. We're getting into I think that foundation was really important to get the understanding of CLA and the classic, the importance of theology, the importance of pedagogy and all those different areas. So now we're getting into the real meat, but I suppose the meat wouldn't make sense without the bone, so we've got them going together. So we're spending time, I'll shoot past some of them, but basically the paradigm or the metaphor we're using is for each of the learning experiences 1, 2 and 3. As you'll see from the notes, we've got a planet, which I recommend as the main focus. I mean, you might be able to find a better one, so see how you go. And then the moons. And as I said before, you might drill deeply into 2 or 3 moons, or you might find yourself, you might have time to go to 5 or 6, or you might be able to get the students to work in groups and whatever. So what I've got just briefly before each one is just some notes on what is the learning pathway, which means how are you going to get the students into it. And I know some of you come from arts and PDHPE and history, so it'll be a pathway that you're comfortable with, but it's got to stretch you as well. So this is the basic framework for learning experience 1. Social justice is basically focused on the example of Jesus Christ and those other areas. I'm not worried about reading that because we're going to unpack it as we go along. So what are some of the theological insights that will accompany this and the other learning experiences? Theology, I've mentioned this before, the whole idea of beholding or contemplating means you have to stop and look and pay attention. So this is why theology is important, and it links all the Catholic liberal arts. So this beholding or contemplating reality seeks to bring together and hold together coherently the complex biblical witness to the nature of God, significance of Jesus Christ. So here's the punchline. The task of theology is to find the big picture. So remember I said before, connected knowing, connecting all these areas, connecting science with the art, which is different from separate knowing or silo knowing. So we're talking about connected knowing, making connections between music and sculpture and painting and stories and so on. Theology, I said before, is the glue or theoretical framework that does that allows the big picture to connect. Another, which is a pedagogical principle, wonder is the beginning of wisdom. Like more handouts is not the beginning of wisdom. So this idea that you have a wonder or an awe and you are struck by something and you need to find out more about it. So if you can engender that in the classroom, it's not every moment or every lesson. We've mentioned the 3 transcendentals. So this is the one path, and Robert Barron says there are 3 entry points. Once we are grasped by beauty, we are drawn to understand goodness and truth as an act of irresistible attraction to the beautiful God. So someone mentioned seeing Chartres Cathedral, for example, or Notre Dame, or the English ones, or even St Mary's, some of the sculptures there. It's what draws you in. Like they're designed to draw you in and to stop you and get you to look. And I think this is important. The 7 main theological themes you have to try and engage in some way for social justice teaching. You know them, so I won't read them out. Notice number 7, which links to Laudato Si from Pope Francis. Once again, care for God's creation, the fact that we've neglected the creatures. And once you neglect the creatures, and the person we looked at in the last session, Mary Midgley, the UK scientist, has said we need the creatures, we need to be able to live with the creatures and provide habitat with them. And the importance of emphasising the common good. So that's the common good of the whole creation, not just human society. Is it possible, this is a question, to start with the visual representation of social justice? So I put a couple of images up there. The students can look at them and design their own. There's a whole lot of art-making practices implicit in this. So you notice they've done fingerprints for the human heart in the middle, and they've done the hands around. And you can see the small primary child, on the poster out there has got the hands with the paint on it as you're walking into the room down the corridor there. So this idea of making the handprint, especially in Indigenous art, is extremely ancient. What are some learning pathways into it? We just looked at some theology and spirituality. Can you define justice and social justice? Can you use a Socratic method where you get the students to commit to a definition? And in one of the activities, if you can take social justice, they might find a definition that they're initially happy with, and they've got to write it on the ball and commit to it. So they've got to put their initials beside it. If they want to change it or write a new definition, they have to give an explanation that satisfies the teacher and the rest of the class as a community of learners. So just say, look, I'm not happy with this definition of social justice because it doesn't include creation. That's a good argument. So therefore, you need to extend one of your definitions or cross it out. So you might have 3 or 4 definitions there and say, you know, and then you might redefine it at the end of the strand. So there's different ways of doing that. So that's just an explanation of that. So there's a couple of definitions there. Social justice is the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political and social rights and opportunities. Notice that often spirituality and religion is left out, so that needs to be put in there. What persons or celebrities that you know could act as models of social justice? What are some issues such as Black Lives Matter? The Mission Australia Report 2020 lists the 3 top social justice concerns of young people as equity and discrimination, impact of COVID-19 and mental health. So what are the concerns, and is the class involved in that? The digital pervasion of social justice, the 21-year-old Swedish student who live-streamed her protest against the deportation of Afghan asylum seeker. It's been viewed by more than 11 million times. So these were listed in that issue on the conversation as the, or Yeshiva University, as the 9 big issues for youth. So I'll just list those there. What are the earliest images of Jesus linked to social justice? It's quite interesting that the early Christians were embarrassed by the crucifixion because Jesus was executed as a criminal. And images, the earliest images of crucifixion we have is around the mid-200s. 586. So the earliest images from the catacombs, 200s, but look at the time it took, 586 CE until the crucifixion appeared. So they were thinking that the Messiah was coming back. It was going to be the second coming. So they thought from reading the oral tradition of the scriptures before it was written down, from hearing the stories that God would come back and sweep them all up. So they had images like the Good Shepherd, the Divine Banquet, Eucharistic images of, you know, what would happen after they died. And then they realised it wasn't going to happen immediately. So I think the parable of the 10 wise and foolish virgins would have tipped them off. There's a lot of parables that say, well, you could be waiting a long time, but it's going to come. So what is the basic premise of social justice? This is one of my mini sermons. The Our Father, it's not that we're escaping the earth. The Our Father says, may your will be done on earth as in heaven. We're trying to link heaven and earth together. We're not trying to escape the earth. It's not like an alien spaceship adventure. So we're trying to say, what is heaven and the kingdom of God like, the world that God and Jesus wants? We've got to try and transform the earth so that it becomes like heaven. It's not escaping from earth, you know, from this this vale of tears, as sometimes the other generations call it, and escaping to heaven will be safe. It's making earth like heaven. So that is the essence of social justice. So what does God want? What is the kingdom of heaven like? We'll look at a passage on the final judgment in Matthew 25. Other questions, what issues actually interest the students? So can you pick ones that they like and then pick others that will stretch them, that they wouldn't necessarily investigate? pick one of the Australian Bishops' social justice statements. I think one of them, maybe 2014 or something, I forget it. The social justice statements are listed in your program, and one of them is called Lazarus at Our Gates. So the poor man Lazarus is waiting there for social justice. So that could be one. We're looking at the art images. That could be one for a case study. So there's lots of, this is replete with possibilities, you might say. I've just listed some insights from the Compendium of Social Doctrine of the Church. If you want to certainly use the Catechism, but this is one specifically on social justice. So if you get a copy of that in your library, I've put in some passages there that you might want to look at. If you haven't got time to look at it, it's quite thick. I think I said in the last one, there are 3 columns of listings in the index for justice. That's, it's a very big issue. All of this is in your program, so I won't go, it's just to give you a focus. Okay, what are some images to stimulate discussion of justice and peace? So the thing with the little wooden blocks down below, there's no justice without peace. There's some quite clever ones there. Doves flying in front of hands with the image of the world on it. So what are some images? Can the students design some? I just thought an initial painting before we go into the planets, I'm not sure if I've got I didn't correct the spelling there. That's Moramura, not Moramira. If you'll probably spot that, those that are reading the notes very carefully. So Yasamasa Moramura, and this painting is called Blinded by the Light. I don't know whether you've seen that. Some of the art teachers would have seen it. And a lot of these, as I said before, there are classics inside classics. So some of these are referencing other paintings. In this case, it's Peter Bruegel's painting, The Parable of the Blind. So it raises that issue. Why are people blind in society? Why are they in the darkness? Why don't they see? In what ways are they blind to social justice? So I'll put that back to the other one. So he's actually put himself in that painting. You'll notice on the red bag in the middle he's got his name Moramura. I think he's got some different people. He dressed up as some of the characters anyway. So they're leading each other into the ditch, the blind leading the blind. So is that through consumerism? Is it through focusing on the wrong things? The person third from the left has got hand grenades for sunglasses. So one method we'll use later is you can divide the painting into 4. This is an Edward de Bono activity, and then get a group of students to look at each quadrant. Because when we look at it, our eye might be drawn towards the church or towards the gully or the money or the bag in the middle, the bright colours tend to attract our eyes. So you need to actually do a systematic analysis of the painting and try and look at the quadrants. I'll show you how that works later. So Bruegel has been very influential in that area. Moramura is like Magritte, if you've seen the artist Magritte, who does these sort of surrealistic composite sort of images. He's got paintings within paintings of himself. He's got the egg, and then the egg is smashed on the table in front of him. And there's a bit of a commentary there. So some of the things in the painting, once again, get the students to look at it, like what do they see before you look at this commentary. Don't show it like now. I'm just sort of giving you a fast track thing. But, even keep it for a day or two, have a look at it. And this sort of describes what's in the painting. But of course there's other things that you can see. So the foundational metaphor that we're using is the planet and the moon. So this is living experience 1. And the planet I'm suggesting is the main focus. So the question is, you need to have a main focus you can go deep into, and then maybe some subsidiary moons around the outside. So Christopher Fry says, we're going deeper. The enterprise is exploration into God. Where are you making for? It takes so many thousand years to wake but will you wake for pity's sake? So we have to wake up and we have to see. So really the centre of the Catholic liberal arts is Christ, or the reflection of Christ in some way. So the focal planet is the 7 works of mercy. Louise and others who've been to the previous ones, you might remember for sacraments, at the service of communion, the focus was the 7 sacraments, if you've seen that artwork. If not, look it up. It's a triptych by Rogier van der Weyden. I think, anyway. Is it a V or W? Anyway, it might be W-E-Y-D-E-N. So it's called the 7 Sacraments. It's a huge triptych or 3-panel. So this one is a good one to follow it. I've given you 3 versions to look at, and we'll look at in a minute. And then some of the moons you might like to explore. And don't forget, you can put these together, put the music with the artwork. There's a sculpture, there's a painting and sculpture. I've picked these because they're very self-contained, they're easy to look at. But you can go deeply into them. The scripture passage is important. Matthew 25, fragments, and then a song. So in sacraments, we looked at this one. This is Van der Weyden. And the 7 sacraments are inside all 3 of those panels. So you can actually focus on it. I'm using a different computer, so I can't... Okay. So you can focus on sacraments there, and you can sort of zoom in and have a look at the features. It's possible to write down on the painting what you understand and what you don't understand, what you've got questions about, and we'll look at some speech bubbles as well. Now, your handout number 4 is focused on what I think is a good one for this unit, the 7 corporal works of mercy or charity. So the one on the front page, so this is handout number 4. It's by the Master of Alkmaar. So I think in terms of how you can use these panels, or you can focus on some of them, it'd be very hard to find a better one than this. Although sometimes artists have got them all within the one frame. So you've got giving drink to the thirsty on the left there, and you've got visiting the sick on the right panel. So there's 7 of these panels, so 1504. So that's the whole 7. So what I'm suggesting, I mentioned hooks before, when you're going to learning experience 1, 2 and 3, go back to these as hooks, and you might go back to different ones and say, remember we talked about this? So they might be getting, hopefully, deeper insights into this as they go along. Now just look at these 2. This one is feeding the hungry, and again, giving drink to the thirsty. I've repeated that there. Can you see a common figure in those paintings? So the Master of Alkmaar has put a common figure in each of the 7 panels. So this is this thing of, like looking and noticing.
Is it the one of the lady there with the Lake Mary?
It could be. I haven't looked right across, but there's another
Can I
figure.
point to it?
Yeah.
So it would be that one and that one. I don't know.
Okay, one there and one there. Okay. So this is good. There's things about the painting that we know and don't know. There could be a Marian presence in that painting. And there's messages that he's trying to give the society of his time in the 1500s. Anyone see anyone else as a common one in the painting?
The third from the left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this figure,
That one.
There and there.
And if you look at all the others.
Okay, and you notice just different features too, like a crippled. There's all sorts of symbols for the animals as well.
Pretty rich.
And sometimes the animals have got different symbolic meanings in different paintings, so you need to have a look at it. And often in the background there's things going on are put there. You notice there's a suggestion of a pilgrim's badge there. So he's crossing over the theme. So one of the 7 works of mercy is giving hospitality to the stranger, which in those days often meant the pilgrim. So otherwise they would have been beaten up. And in fact, a lot of the pilgrims had to make their wills because a lot of them didn't return. So when you went from Canterbury or you went to Santiago de Compostela and some of those sites, you made your will because a lot of people didn't return. Okay, clothing the naked, and you can see that figure again in the background. So it's sort of like, you know, they very much saw the presence of Christ there. Christ was a real character, like weighing up souls all the time. And this is, you know, sort of weighing up your deeds, but, you know, I remember someone told me in the Maitland Newcastle office they put signs around the room or in little places like, and it just said, "I saw that." So it's like Jesus or God sort of watching over you, so a little bit of a joke, but, you know, in the sense that that's the world, and they had this weighing up of souls, which you'll see with Lazarus and Dives later on. So this thing of, in terms of social justice, like, will my deeds be weighed up? Like, if the psalm says, all my deeds have been written in your book, what does that mean? Okay, that was from another culture, they didn't know it was going on, or is there, you know, is it still relevant? So these are the questions that it raises. Burying the dead, you know, that notice that Christ is not in that one because it's Christ in glory up above. And notice it's the burial of the dead, so he's pointing to his wound, the wound of the passion. We saw that one before, visiting the sick. And you can see the pilgrim's hat, so which one might this be? Welcoming the stranger, yes. So you notice that it switches in the last one. So the direction I'm heading is the reason why I think this is a great artwork is it's got a 1504 version, it's got a modern version that someone did, and it was actually a light installation panel that they put in a cathedral, and also you could invite your students to take movie clips or pictures of their own 7 works of mercy. So it's got many possibilities, you can go in many different directions. Okay, so you've got Mary, the Mother of God. Notice in the early paintings too, it was the youth of the resurrection. Jesus has a very young face. He's not always old and grizzled. You see Mary is very young, you know, the Immaculate Conception. And it's also a picture, Christ is standing on the world as the judge of the world. So it's like a final judgment. So there's these fantastic paintings I'll show in future ones where, you know, they've got a person who's dying and the angels are trying to pull the person this way and the devils are in the window trying to pull them back the other way. But it's symbolically, it's this language of light and darkness, like we've always got a choice. So this is a way that you could, let's look at it as an act of imagination. What speech bubbles could you put if you look at the figures up the back and you look at the figures in the front? There's a woman who's expecting a baby by the looks of it in the front, I would say. Could be twins. But if you put speech bubbles on that painting, what could you put there? So this is, remember, welcoming the stranger. So the person with the hat, so it's the scallop shell from Santiago de Compostela. So that's the symbol of St. James. So once again, there's, you know, as the students do this, they'll get used to the symbols and actually reading it because these symbols keep on being used. So they put that there and say the people will recognise I'm using this visual imagery. You know, it's like a whole paragraph in that shell there. So notice Christ up at the back, in the background again. So what speech bubbles could you put there? Do you want to have a chat about it first? Okay, have a chat. Yeah, what speech bubble would you put on what character? We just take a few, whether it's from Jesus or whether it's from the pilgrim or the woman. Okay, we get a few.
We just mentioned in terms
Okay, just listening.
just asking strangers if they're thirsty, if they're hungry, if they need to rest, what is it that, how can they help them with their needs?
Yeah. And specifically, as I said in the shadow, ask that, you can't see it very well there, you can see it more there. You know, would you like some shoes, my friend? I notice you haven't got any shoes, so it's just basic things like that. Yeah.
I was just going to say, on the shadow as well, the pilgrim, if you will, is casting like a larger shadow, maybe symbolising like doubt from the people in the town as well.
Yes, yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. It's, there's that element of a bit of stranger danger, isn't it, that's going on. Yeah, I'll show you my speech bubbles in a minute, so one of them brings that out. But yeah, we did this in Wollongong, where Kathy Brown was down in Wollongong, and they almost went for about 2 or 3 days putting speech bubbles on some of these. It just got out of hand a bit, I think. No, but you can be quite creative and a little bit funny as well. Okay, so what do you think Jesus and some of the other characters have been saying, or the people talking in a sort of hidden way up the back too? You can make all sorts of associations with this. Any others that you'd put there?
The person behind the stranger in blue, I don't know if he's more annoyed that the other person's in front of him, or if he
That one there?
yeah, or that he just doesn't like the person in front of him. I don't know whether it's annoyance. I'm next after that person, or I don't like them. He's not happy.
It looks like some of them have got, they've also got pilgrim shells on them by the looks of it. Yeah, so it could be, you know, like this person has come in, you know, at the moment we've got a bit of a famine, so there's no way we can feed these strangers that are coming in. Or as you said, you could just imply, look, these people just got off the boats down to bathe, you know, we haven't got...
And also, there's, what would you say, it's multiplied, the effect, because look behind, 3 images behind, the back, they're doing the same thing, essentially, welcoming people.
Yeah, there could be Chinese whispers going through the town and whatever. What about the pregnant woman and oh no, you go first.
I was just about to allude to that. You've got that reference to the no room at the end.
Yeah.
With Mary.
Yeah.
And that's sort of that sort of welcoming aspect there.
Yeah. She could say, look, you know, I was here first and I've got nowhere to live, but you're giving. It was actually a true story. Like my wife comes from Holland, and they were giving a whole lot of refugees came in, and all the places there were no places for the other homeless in the village, and that was a big problem. And you might have heard that normally a group that goes to third world countries, Médecins Sans Frontières, has gone into Holland, into some of the villages to sort out issues there. So, you know, it's not just a third world problem. Okay, any others before we... So that's a... Yes, yeah. Beck?
So Peter, is the female who's present in... There is a female pretty much in the foreground in every image.
Right.
Is she representative of...
I'm sure I'll have to go back and look at that. She could be.
There is a female, except in burying the dead, there's Mary is up.
Yeah, because the clergy take over and burying the dead.
But
Yeah.
there is a female present in the foreground in every...
Yeah, that's very good.
Either front and centre or in waiting. You know,
Yes, and in some cases, like the feeding of the hungry, she's the main person involved in the distribution.
well, she's carrying something each time,
Yes, yeah,
I think.
yeah, very interesting. Yeah, good observation.
Just say Christ following in your footsteps as well.
Yeah,
I was actually thinking that the figure of Christ is almost, because everyone else is sort of engaging, look at, is almost being a commentary. Like, my brain was actually thinking speech bubbles for everyone talking to each other, but what would Jesus be saying if you go to the scriptures?
yes, yeah.
So it's a reflection on the scriptures.
And he's really the ultimate stranger, but he's letting all these other strangers go in front of him. So,
Yeah.
but there's all these sort of ancient texts too. You don't know what they're referencing. So there's an ancient saying, I think it's from the Celtic, which would have been before this, about the shadow of the Galilean. So you can see all the other shadows there, but there could be all sorts of things going on in the mind of the painter. Because don't forget, these people were looking at all the other paintings that were going on. If they saw medieval illuminations, they were looking at that. If they got to Rome, they'd look at that. During the Reformation, there was a big split between Rome and the north of the German and the other countries. So there was a different type of art emerging. So it depends on the context. Okay, so here's some that I just did, but they might give you some ideas as well. So it's that whispering up the back that I think people were talking about as well. Like, they could be saying, let's get the police ready to, put these people in detention or something because something, next thing they'll be coming in and stealing stuff from our houses. So there could be a friendly one. So what's it like? You could be in a town with no accommodation and you don't speak the language or whatever. So what's that like? So, and I know we're going into pilgrimage, which is church, but if you want to rest with a good novel, read the Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, if you want a novel to read, about someone who goes on a pilgrimage to visit someone who's dying. It's by Rachel Joyce. I think it's going to be made into a film. But in terms of pilgrimage, you could easily use a section from that. So is there a scripture passage you can put with Jesus? It's something from Matthew 25. As often as you did this, you did it to me, like those sorts of passages. So a similar thing to what was mentioned, what would the woman say in front? Or she could be saying, my 3 sons have returned, you better find a place for them, or something like that. So there's many possibilities there. So this was put together in 2010 in St. Lawrence Kirk. So that was put together in Rotterdam in the north. So what these 2 artists did, male and female, was they put it inside the church as lightbox installation. So you can see that on the second page, behind that page there. So that was their interpretation of the 7 acts of mercy. So I've given the titles of those, the panels above and below. So you can see down the bottom the prison. You might just look at your handout, you can get a clearer view of them. So it's the clergy inside an actual prison, visiting the prisoner. The one in the top right, the burying the dead, they have a custom in parts of Holland where those that you know nothing about, it's called the burial of the homeless or the lonely. And they have a group of people that find out all about this person because there's no relatives, they don't know anything, so that they can give them a proper burial. It's a beautiful thing. So that's what they chose for burying of the dead. So once again, you could put speech bubbles on that as well if you were looking at the situation of, I think the poster on the left actually says in full, surviving Holland. So what is the doctor or the social worker saying to these people? What are they saying back? So they're prints in light boxes. So this is his take on welcoming the stranger. Anthony, what time do we finish again?
12:30.
12?
30.
12:30, okay, great. And then have we got some more time after that, after lunch? How much? I'm just trying to pace it. About 40 minutes or something like that. Anyway, We should get through most, that's okay.
Yeah.
2,500 consultations a year to refugees. So as I said before, is it possible to get students to take their own 7 works of mercy? Can it be part of formal or informal assessment? Like how can you build it in? Right, so that's what I would suggest as the main planet. So you might want to, it's really to promote thought and discussion. So what would you pick as the main planet? So obviously you can see there, and I didn't, so I'll go back. I've given you a third image on the handout there. The 7 works of mercy, a little bit later, 1581. Actually, it was painted 100 years later, between 1606 and 1616. So some of these paintings by Rembrandt and many of the other artists, there was another one I was looking at, Vermeer, they took years to paint some of these paintings. So they weren't very good at commission. So just have a look at that painting and see if you can spot the 7 works of mercy. So look at the handout. That's in the one painting, so if you're time poor, but I think there's other possibilities for the other one.
Peter, there's a great site called On Art and Aesthetics, and it's got like every sort of work. It's got that one that you've got.
Right.
It's got like about, I don't know, a dozen more from different artists.
Oh, great.
Even some that have serialized it like that.
Right, okay, oh, great. So there's a site they're talking about called On Art and Aesthetics, which you might want to look up as well, that's got art and commentary. So there's lots of resources on this, but see if you can spot. So obviously in the front, but some of them are a little bit hidden. You've got Feed the Hungry in the front. So see if you can spot the other 7. Okay, did you find them all? Some of them in little rooms. There's Take Care of the Sick in one of the little rooms up the back left-hand corner. And they're burying the dead right down the back in the graveyard. So once again, what could the students do with that? Like what is the... They might take a different interpretation of what do you mean by dead or deceased. Are some people living? Okay, we'll go through the moons. So I thought in terms of this, the theme of homelessness. So if you've seen that sculpture before by Timothy Schmaltz, it's similar to some artworks. The wounds in the feet almost look like eyes. So it's like the face is looking at you, like one of the Lord of the Rings characters, what the Rangers in the hoods, you know.
And the eyes, the wounds are looking away from.
Yeah, and the wounds.
It's one of those at St James in the city, the Anglican.
Oh, right, okay.
On a
Right.
bench outside where the homeless guys actually stand.
Oh, right, okay, good. Notice the little sign on Jesus down the bottom, will work for loaves and fishes. There's a couple of... I think Pope Francis actually has a small model that was given to him of that sculpture. Another possibility, I'm just going through these because the websites are there and you can look them up. A painting and sculpture pairing. The woman accused of adultery, like one of the great social justice issues of the Bible. The whole idea of sin and retribution, guilt, catching people out, shame, the role of women in society, the power of men in that particular society. The law was basically used to assault people. Jesus comes along and says, what I want is mercy, not sacrifice. So once again, Peter Bruegel the Elder. So there's some websites there. So once again, you can split that painting up. And the artist is very much looking at lines and perspective. You'll notice the figures he wants you to look at are lit up. So where are the brighter colours? In fact, it looks like a bit of a division between light and darkness to a certain extent. Notice what they do with the hands and the feet. Often the medieval artists will extend the fingers and the toes to emphasise. You noticed, Christ's finger looks to me like a fairly long finger. You've got sticks there. You've got the woman accused of adultery with the fingers that are sort of wrapped together with the knuckles. So, you're teaching students to read the body language. So you can say, what can you find in those quadrants? Someone said, the pouch that the man in the front is carrying on the right is a money pouch, and someone said, I know it's a lamp, but he hasn't got it switched on. So without knowing, it's good to see the cultural context, but it could read things into that. That could provide insights.
What do you think they're looking at?
That's a good question. Well, there's rocks thrown on the ground there already.
Is
So
Jesus picking
it's in
up
a
the
certain
stone?
part.
Could Jesus be picking up?
So that's the question. What is Jesus writing?
That's what he said, but we don't know
We
what
never
he's
know.
writing.
I think I've got it in one of my books. I'll have to have a look. So it could be that text from the scriptures. It's written in Dutch or Flemish. So, but someone has done a translation, but I think, yes, it's something about whoever is without sin cast the first stone. But some people have said, when they first looked at it, he's writing down the sins of all the people there on the ground. So he's showing, you've got this woman here, I'm writing down all your sins. So there's different, there's factual things, but there's different directions you can take it in. So you can actually look at different, split the quadrants further and look at the people. So there's children there. See the fellow with the basket of rocks in the back? He was obviously hoping to make a killing. It's a bit like the life of Brian. So on the left there, sorry, that was an unintended pun, but he was hoping to sell a lot of rocks, and he's walking away. So who would have been there? Yeah, someone selling rocks.
Oh, is that what he's got?
He's got a basket of rocks.
Right.
So that's what I mean when you look just into those little corners. You can just see that section there. There's the soldiers up the back. The soldiers think it's all over. They've got the helmet, so they thought, oh, well, Jesus has solved the problem, so we'll go home. Time of the day, do you think?
Looks like dusk.
By dusk or evening. Okay, so all these things are deliberate. Like he hasn't painted it in the light of day, and he's suggesting, like the arrest of Jesus, that this has happened at night. It's sort of under the cloak of darkness. So let's get away. Let's make this accusation and accuse this woman. Okay, so a sculpture that might go with that as well. So you'll notice this is a very different representation. So the light is coming on the sculpture. What do you notice about this sculpture that's maybe the same or different about either the woman or Jesus?
It's much more intimate, she's touching him.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be an association too with the woman who touched the cloak of Jesus and was healed, like this closeness. Notice how big Jesus' clothes are as well. Like that would have been pretty unwieldy to walk around the dusty roads of Palestine. So it could be that's like the covering of God, like they call it the Shekinah. So it's the tent or covering that protects. So there's lots of different interpretations, depends on where you're coming from. So when it says I think it says in Matthew's Gospel, God has come down and dwelt among us, the literal translation is that he has pitched his tent among us. he's pitched this canvas awning to cover us. So there could be an association there. What about Jesus' hands?
A protective gesture and an open gesture too.
Yeah.
So he's not necessarily being closed to the people with the stones. He's still, his invitational to everyone.
Yeah, and notice, isn't that interesting? If they know that, some of the kids might say, if you've talked about may your will be done on earth as in heaven, on earth as in heaven. He's stretching between earth and heaven. See, he's protecting, as you said, the woman, like the Shekinah, he's reaching up to heaven. Right? Everything is, like Jesus is not about the ego. Jesus is about, he gets everything from the Father and says, whoever sees me sees the Father. It's not about me or what a great ministry I've been having. It's, I and the Father are one. That's what it's about. I'm happy, in a sense, because I'm acting outside myself from the source of truth, beauty and goodness. That's what we'd say today. What about the figure of the woman down below?
Is it strange that she's not looking at Jesus?
Very much focused, looks pretty fearful, doesn't she?
Yeah.
So you could almost pick the moment of the story when this is happening. If you go back, so I think part of the thing here, don't look at just at the image, go back to the scripture passage, because there's things in the scripture passage that the artist has been reading that they're trying to put. Okay, what version? Maybe they looked at all the versions. But it looks like, what instance of the story do you think it is if she's looking so worried? It's not the same instance as Peter Bruegel where they're going away. What part of the story do you think it might be?
They're approaching with rocks.
Yeah, they're approaching with rocks, right? It's a very intimidating, like she thinks, I'm going to die.
And the fact that her shoulders exposed would have been a scant. You would never have an exposed shoulder, so that suggests to me that she may even have been sort of flung to the ground.
Yeah, she's been,
She may already have
she's still
suffered
trying to
some-
cover herself up.
She's just shedded.
She's got the shame and probably, waiting for the rocks to start. And maybe if you've got time, look at the stoning of Stephen in the Acts of the Apostles. So that's an Italian sculpture. So I've just put a few questions there. So once again, I'm doing this very quickly. I'm trying to model this thing of looking at the image. Like it's almost like a juice extractor. See how much you can get out of the image, and and what you can see. Beck?
I'm just trying to think also the Marian perspective.
Yeah.
I'm just reading here, there's something about, he refers to this adulterous lady as a woman, as he referred to his mother, Mary, in John chapter 2, verse 4, but she's also looking a bit like in the Annunciation. There's many images of
Yeah,
Mary
that
looking afraid.
cowering with the angel. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if you wanted to,
Yeah. But I mean, see,
focus on the female, the woman.
This was the Jewish form of interpretation that Jesus was very comfortable with, is looking at that and then looking at other passages and even looking at the letters. They call it gematria. And then you added up the numbers of the letter value in Moses and see if that matched another. Like they were all over the place. Yeah, gematria, yeah. So you might say, the letters of Yeshua in Aramaic or in Greek, they've got number, A equals 1, B equals 2 and so on, and that matched another word. They were very fluid, and they had many different interpretations of Scripture. And maybe some of the Psalms, I will hide you in the shadow of my wings. But there's all sorts. It depends on what knowledge of Scripture, but you might be able to suggest some. You might get a concordance and look up, shadow or
That passage that Beck mentioned, I think that's wedding at Cana, where he refers to Mary as woman, what business is this of yours and mine? So in that, Mary's provoking Jesus to action, and in this woman here also is the catalyst that provokes Jesus to the action. So if you did want to, there's a way into this passage through the vantage point of the women.
And also how he also was seen as hard in the wedding at Cana on his mother.
Yeah.
And he's seen as protective and loving.
Yeah. So the stories fit together really well.
Yeah.
And there's about 2 or 3. The other one was on the cross. where Jesus gives Mary to John to look after. Woman, this is your son. Son, this is your mother. So in a protective sense, so this woman is anticipating a passion. There's links there as well. Like she could be dead. That's what it meant during those times. So I've mentioned the Shekinah, but it's mentioned in a few other Gospels. So there's a Hebrew inscription. If you've looked at the Archibald Prize, you might have noticed that John Safran one. There's a John Safran artwork where he's both David and Goliath. So you'll see it on the Art Gallery New South Wales site, and he's got Hebrew in that passage as well. So it's got John Safran as David, and he's holding the head of Goliath after it's been cut off, but it's also his own face. So he's both David and Goliath. And Caravaggio used to do this as well. He put his, like if John the Baptist's head was cut off, he'd put his own head there. So it's this, they're talking about their own life and their own suffering and anxiety. Okay, the next one you've got an article on. Now, what do you make of this one? Just pretend you haven't read any articles or anyone. So this is one of mine that I've thrown in. I've also got some bottle top art that I might bring in for you that I think the students would have fun with as well. You just put an icon in the middle and then there's bottle tops around the outside, but you've got to get through about 20 bottles of wine before you can construct the artwork, so I'm still working on that. But I'll show you one on Jesus as the true vine actually. So it's the icon, if you've seen the Orthodox icon of Jesus as the true vine, and all the bottle caps say something, and the kids can say, well, that letter means that, we've read the passage, it means something about Jesus as the true vine or the grapes or whatever. So, and with wine caps, it's all about grapes and harvest, isn't it? So you can have a lot of associations. So the colours aren't exactly right there, but this one, I suppose two questions. Can you identify, Beck, you're not allowed to answer this, or any art teachers, can you identify the figures from famous artworks? So the Christ and the woman. So this is called Jesus Cures the Woman with the Flow of Cash. So I just put this here because all these artworks reference other artworks. So there's an article that sort of... So I've listed some of the social justice themes there. Exclusion. But let's go back. I'm going too far ahead. What do you see in the artwork? That's where you really should start. So what do you think is happening in the artwork?
Transaction.
So there's some sort of transaction. It's interesting that I've, not deliberately, it's followed up by the woman accused of adultery. This is a different type of obsession or addiction. So what do you think she's holding?
Credit card?
Could be a credit card. There's actually 3 characters in the painting. So the Christ on the left is from an icon. It's one of the famous images, and you get to recognise these as you look through them, especially if you get a couple of Sister Wendy books and look through those. They're all in there. So the Call of the Apostles, which we'll look at in a minute. Do you recognise the woman on the right? It's one of those artists who used to paint the sunlight coming through the window on the... A Vermeer, yeah, very good. So that one is from a painting, the woman holding a balance. But she's really a woman that's in the balance. Do you recognise the table down the bottom? I mentioned this painting before. There's a table in the middle of a painting that has 3 angels in it. Rublev's Trinity. Okay, so one of the symbols, so there's paintings within paintings. So the little table there's a golden opening in the front, and they think that Rublev symbolised that as the narrow way. It's a very small opening. You know, some people go along the road that is wide and spacious, and other people go through the narrow way. And then what you'd do is you'd link that up with Robert Frost's poems, you know, what's it called, the 2 roads or the 2 ways. You know, I chose the narrow way, I had a choice between 2 paths. Anyway, Robert Frost, the American poet. But you can sort of, you know, it's like when I was growing up, we had a store called Suzanne, which I didn't go to, it was a women's store. But the ad, do you remember the ad for that? This goes with that at Suzanne. Yeah, good, some people. So it was like, you know, this item goes with that item. So it's a bit, Catholic liberal arts is a bit the same. Like, this goes with that. Like, what bit of music would go with that? What poetry would go with that? And get the students to do some of the work. Like, it's, you know, like when you went into a medieval cathedral, there'd be the visual, there'd be the incense, there'd be the choirs going. Like, all the senses were being basically bombarded. So, and we're sort of cut off from all that. Okay, so that's the details of that one. If you look at your handouts, we're going well. So, handout number 5, it's got an explanation. And I'll leave you to read that, but you can see on page 1 there of that handout, handout number 5, down the bottom is the work of Duccio. So it's the calling of the apostles Peter and Andrew. So the figure on the left, the Christ, is the one put in that painting. So the context, it's interesting you're putting, you know, a meaning of one painting into another. Just because you cut it off doesn't mean the meaning of the original painting isn't there. So Jesus is basically calling someone to be a disciple. And over on page 3 you'll see the Vermeer. And it'd be interesting to get groups of students to look at that, because it just goes deeper and deeper. So that's the woman holding a balance, or the woman weighing gold. It says down towards the bottom of page 3. 1664. So you'll notice in that painting the light, the muffled light is coming in from the top left. Can you make out the painting at the back? Because Vermeer has put that there deliberately. So that's what I mean, is that painting has been infused into this painting. So you've got to understand the original painting before you go into this one. You might recognise the Christ figure up the back. There's a Christ figure in, it's very hard to see, but these are classic images of Christ judging the world. So you can see Christ is in a ball of light up the top there, and then there's the judgment going on below, the sheep and the goats, which was one of your passages for this unit, Matthew 25. So the woman is being judged. She's actually weighing up fine metals there. So I've given her a Visa card. You notice anything about the red in the painting? I'll just ask you 2 more things about it, including that one. So where is the red in the painting? On the right-hand side.
On her clothing.
Yeah, on her clothing. So she could be, there's the questions about the Vermeer one, she could be pregnant, but there's a bit of bleeding going on there. Yes, yeah, you can see the swelling. But there's the red of redemption or divinity on the right and the blue of divinity. And there's a sort of bleeding going on with the credit card. You know, is it bleeding cash or materialism or...
Or is it blood on her hands? I don't know.
Yeah, it could be with the shadow there.
But on the table, is that like the wounds of Christ?
Yeah, it could be. Like, it depends. I think it'll depend on your reproduction and what the colours are and also what your photocopier does at school, because the colours come out differently, but it could provide some fun. What about her? You can see the original Vermeer. If you look at the original one on page 3, I've sort of emphasised this. Do you notice something on her veil? I think Vermeer has done this even more. It's like a hand on the side of the head. So it looks like something has grabbed her. So it's very pronounced on Vermeer. It looks like a hand that's grabbed her. So we talk about in the scripture, we talk about the hand of God, but there's also the hand of darkness and the hand of judgment. There's the hand of protection and there's the hand of final judgment and damnation. And, you know, these artists were very much aware of this. So this unit is about decision making, about, you know, the choice between darkness and light, good and evil, doing and not doing. So I think I told the last group there was a De La Salle Brothers community, and an old man came to the door and wanted accommodation. There was nothing left. So this links up with the homeless thing that we spoke about earlier. And they said, look, there's no room, you'll have to go somewhere else. So the brother who did this told me the story. He was living in the community. And he said they went outside the next morning and the person was dead in the bushes there. So that's a story, like, and then what does he do with that, with the memory of that story? Like, how does he go back to that? How does he make sense of it? So some of these are very real situations, but we sometimes we don't face those ones. Okay, some scripture passages from Amos about justice. So this is moon number 4. So some of these you can see some of these take more time to go into, but I think that's the depth we were talking about. And you might want to say, look, read these passages from Amos, keep a journal during the unit and write what you can see is the connection between Amos and some of the artworks that we've looked at. There's different ways where you could do that. There's a page there on fragments as well. And that just basically says God comes to us as fragments, like we've got fragments of text. We only see a fragment of God, we never see the whole thing. So one of the passages there is Exodus 33. And Moshe in Judaism, Moses, says, can you show me yourself? I want to see you. And God says, well, you can't see me because the scripture says if you see God, you die. So I'll just show you my back. And in the Hebrew, it means backside, so it's a little bit of a joke in the text. So Moses is hidden in the cleft of the rock. There's a lot of jokes that we don't get that are hidden in the text like that. So he only sees a part of God. And in a sense, if you think of the transfiguration, they only saw a part of Jesus as well. Like they couldn't look upon him. And then, Peter's babbling incoherently, let's build tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. But it says, but he didn't know what he was saying. He was completely overcome, as you would be. So they saw Jesus, and then they saw the transfigured Christ. Right, the timeless Christ talking to the prophets. So I think that'd throw you. And the supper at Emmaus is another one in the New Testament. They recognised him after he was gone. Didn't recognise him on the road. There was something similar about it, but there's something different. So I've talked about aphorisms before and fragments. So sometimes if you give them a little saying or a little statement, that can get them into, what Benedict is saying or what someone else is saying. So this is Moon 5. These are some books on fragments. They're on your book list anyway. And there's a whole series of articles on the Philosopher's Zone, on the ABC and whatever, why fragments are very important. So here are some fragments that you might want to use. Catechism of the Catholic Church. Read this one, Pope Francis to the De La Salle brothers and all educators. In this relationship, that means teaching, on this pathway you take with them, notice pedagogy of accompaniment, you take with them your students, you offer the values of your rich pedagogical tradition, you educate in responsibility, creativity, coexistence, justice and peace. You educate in the inner life, in being open to the transcendent, in the sense of wonder and contemplation before the mystery of life and creation. You live all of this and you interpret it in Christ and you translate it fully into humanity. May your kingdom come on earth as in heaven. It's translating. But that really sums up everything about education, I think, and what we're trying to do. So there's ones from different people here about social justice. So the question, I'll just show you one more song. So we're getting to the last moon, Moon 6. So once again, there's different directions you can go in, but obviously you can't do a full opera, but you try and pick something that is going to... The reason I picked this, you might have heard Tim Hughes' God of Justice before, is that it's got all the themes. So the question is, am I picking something up that picks up the themes that I've already looked at and that takes them a bit further? And what I like about this is that it has that image of the homeless Christ in it, so it refers to that first moon. And it also has scripture references that kids can look up if they wish to, so I'll just play with them. So the question after this is, what would you do for learning experience 1? So have a think about that.
God of justice, Savior to all, came to rescue the weak and the poor, chose to serve and not be served. Jesus, you have called us. Freely we've received, now freely we will give. We must go, live to feed the hungry, stand beside the broken. We must go, stand before them, keep us from just singing, move us into action. We must go. To act justly every day, love and mercy in every way, walking humbly before you, God. You have shown us what you require. Freely we've received, now freely we will give. We must go, live to feed the hungry, stand beside the broken. We must go, stand before them, keep us from just singing, move us into action. We must go. Fill us up, send us out. 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 We must go, live to feed the hungry, stand beside the broken. We must go, keep us from just singing, move us into action. We must go. Hey.
Okay, so that's learning experience 1. So you could take that in lots of directions as well. Like you could look at it and then get the students to put their own images to it, or maybe pick different songs, or could become part of an assessment task to sum up the whole thing, I'm not sure. Just one thing before I forget with those paintings. The context of the paintings are really important. Like some of you who've dealt with them will know it, but I was dealing with some Rembrandt paintings in another diocese, and there's one called The Jewish Bride, which you can look up, you might know it. So The Jewish Bride he's painted 2 people, and before you jump to conclusions, look at the context of the painting. So he's got his hand on the breast of a woman, so they're married, and they've all got clothes on, I should say that, and she's got her hand on top of his hand. So they're married with the wedding rings, and it's a picture about married intimacy and commitment and covenant, particularly with the Jewish couple. So sometimes we get frightened that, without looking at the context, that, this is going to lead to people, outside groping our students or something like that. So you've got to, and that was the fear by some of the teachers as well. So I think that's a good example of explaining the context before the painting, because he was painting for people, he was painting for citizens who were married. There were very tight strictures there, and he was trying to capture the intimacy of the married relationship. I think she might have been pregnant as well. So, so the context of the painting is really important, because otherwise it's a bit like cancel culture. You might be banishing those paintings without getting something out of them. So that's an important issue. And then, talk to your coordinator about that, why you're using that painting to, anticipate. Okay, any things that you discuss for learning experience 1 that might be good for other people to hear about what you've used, whether it's artworks? I noticed people looking at different artworks and different sites. So did you find anything else that might be of value to other people in the room? I'm just going, yes.
Yeah, so there were 2 films. I had a quick look at our current program. There were 2 films in there that we use at Christian Brothers.
Can you hear up the back there? Right.
The first one was more an introduction to the topic about making good decisions and our moral and ethical responsibility, and it was the Dark Knight clip of the 2 different boats with the detonators,
right,
and weighing up whether they should blow the other one up, etc.
Yeah.
And the second video, the second film that was used is 12 Years a Slave, and so that ties in really well with sort of the acts of mercy.
Yeah. So you try and show an excerpt from that movie? Yeah. So probably, you'd know the movies. In some cases, if it's not too complicated, you can explain the context quite easily. So you need to pick ones that are fairly manageable like that. What about, I might just go around it, and you can say no if there's nothing as well. Anyone down the back table? Any?
I think we spoke earlier just about, you mentioned Shawshank Redemption, and I was talking about, I've used in the past, used a lot of Aaron Brockovich for moral decision making, and I think The Name of the Rose I've used before, which is great. Also, in terms of beauty, each scene is almost, an artwork. And also, I've used just snippets of movies, because a lot of the time you've got to teach the context of the movie at the same time, because the kids are so unfamiliar with.
That's right, yeah. How much context is required?
Yeah, so like Sophie's Choice, you've got to say this is in the context of World War II, this is the decision that this woman had to make, so.
And you've got the flashbacks and all that sort of thing happening.
And you've got to just, and really, because that scene where she has to make that decision, which is horrific, but you've got to build that up for them. It can't just be delivered and then say, oh, what do you reckon? Because it's too powerful. So in a lot of ways, I guess you've got to look at your audience and your kids and say, okay, can they deal with this image first and foremost, and then what do you know about it? What are your thoughts on this before you even go into the classroom?
Yes.
Because, yeah, you don't want to be caught unprepared for the questions that will come from a movie or an image.
Yeah, sure.
And always war movies are when you're teaching social justice and moral decision making, because there's always, you know, I guess, you know, you look at the good and evil of human beings who enter into war and the consequences of their decision making. And also, I guess the boy in the striped pajamas is also always towards.
Yes, yeah.
We do a bit of background on the Nuremberg trials, and we give them the background info about that for personal moral responsibility, and we show snippets of the Joker's experiment. So the students already know the movie, and I don't show them the entire movie, but that scene where there's the two boats, and if you press the detonator, they will die, but if you, and it's a boatload of criminals, where the other is a boatload of civilians, and it's this talk about whose life is worth more value than the other. And that's a really good one, and obviously it was a test of their character, because if they did press it, it would detonate their own, not the other.
Yeah.
So, and the kids really enjoy that.
And if the students want to go a bit deeper, they can go into, you know, the Hannah Arendt and the Nuremberg trials and
Which we do.
the nature of evil. Yeah. So there's some good philosophical. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay.
Oh, Heinz's Dilemma, I always give them that one too, to show them that teenagers are quite conservative in their moral decision making, even though, you know, I guess people think that they usually choose, you know, a more sort of, I guess, seems like an amoral or immoral decision. They actually usually sit right in the middle with their decision making.
I think like when you've got complicated scenes as well, the one thing you can do this visually. You do that slow revelation method where you show them a part of a picture, and you get them to guess what's going on in the picture. Then you gradually show them more of it. And some stories work like there was
Like
one
$1
in.
Million Minute.
Yeah. Well, there was one like Elie Wiesel's got one. He said, you know, the meaning of forgiveness, like forgiveness and hope and justice, which fits in with what we're doing. And he said an SS guard who was dying asked one of the prisoners who had been suffering in the camps to come and forgive him. So he was a German, the other fellow was Jewish, not sure if he was a rabbi, and he said nothing to him. So what you can do is say, well, was that right? Was that justified? Then you start revealing more of the prisoner's story and more of the SS officers. What was the context of the camp? Was he right to forgive or not to forgive? Can you forgive after you don't forgive, and all this sort of stuff? So, yeah, there's some interesting scenarios. Let's just quickly get a few others. Any from the back table at all? Yeah,
I've
Alex.
used Hacksaw Ridge, that war film where the medic is, you know, he's obviously really religious and keeps going up and saves a lot of people and brings them down. And I think they actually took the kids to cinemas, which was a lot of paperwork, but it was good fun. They had their popcorn and came back and did a worksheet, but it was just a good, I think, just to get out of the classroom as well, like, you know, just spice it up a bit.
That's right, yeah. Some learning can happen outside the classroom, can't it? Yeah. Good, thank you. Anyone from this table here? You can pass if you want.
We do in kind of moral dilemmas and moral decision making, we let the kids watch The Help, and we use a character study where they pick one character that focus on 6 decisions, so like obedience, punishment, personal interest, reward, pleasing others, like their duty to the law and order, kind of like what each character, what their motivations would be for any dilemmas they come across in the film.
Yeah.
So we take a character depth study approach.
Yeah, and the basis of, so this is where all the arts come together too, is it? You know, Kohlberg's levels and all that. Why did you make that decision? Yeah, you know. Okay.
I do a presentation where I start off with very traditional images of Jesus, like very Judeo-Christian images, you know, glass, chalice, everything, like maybe the Last Supper or the crucifixion. And then I gradually take them into other culture views of Jesus, like an African Jesus, an Asian Jesus. And the one I finish on is, it's a South American image, used a lot in liberation theology. It's where it's a mat, it's the Last Supper, and Jesus is sitting there, and there's women and men and children to just try and get across the universality of social justice with the kids.
Yeah, and looking at the same, you know, like the spirit of Jesus and the Gospels coming through all of those. is that you might have seen that Guatemalan one of the crucifixion too, where
Yep.
he's absolutely screaming from the cross, right, you know.